Welcome back to Inside the Studio. My next guest is Rudy Francisco, who has created the perfect blend of activism and spoken word poetry to touch the minds around him. He is highly commended for his engagements of young poets for extraordinary performances and workshops. In addition to all of this, he was the 2009 National Underground Poetry Slam Champion, as well as the 2010 Individual World Poetry Slam Champion. It's a pleasure to welcome him to the program. Rudy Francisco, welcome to Inside the Studio.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
As everyone knows, you're a big deal in the spoken word and slam poetry scene. When did you realize this was your calling?
I wouldn't know if I would say that I'm a big deal.
Oh, you are.
I think I'm a medium deal.
You are a big deal.
When I really knew that spoken word poetry was something that I wanted to pursue, I was in undergrad. I randomly stumbled across an episode of HBO Def Poetry, and at the time, like that was the only spoken word show that was on TV, and I saw that, and I just thought it was incredible, because I'd never seen poetry performed out loud before. So I was like, let me give that a shot, right? And after I performed for the first time at a local open mic, like the feeling was just so amazing and so beautiful that I wanted to keep doing it. And it wasn't until much later that I actually found out that it could be a viable profession. But since the first time I performed, I knew that it was something that I wanted to continue doing for the rest of my life in some way, shape, or form.
Let's talk about the differences between spoken word and slam poetry, because there is a difference, right?
Kind of.
What is that difference?
So slam is really just an event, right? It's an event that I enter my poems into. I write poems. I write spoken word poems, and I write whether or not I plan on slamming. Like, if I decide that I'm not going to slam ever again, I'm still going to write, right? So slam is really just the event that we enter our poems in, and it's a competition. Sometimes people say that there's a particular style associated with slam, but I think anybody who's seen enough, competitions knows that the styles that are at slams, like if you go to the National Poetry Slam, there are a lot of different styles there. What
are some styles?
There's some people who go, really intense. There's some people who use like a lot more humor. There's some people who are a lot more like figurative language driven. There are people who have like a very like a flat style where they don't really yell, they don't really get like super, they don't get loud, but you can still hear the intensity in their voice, even though they're not yelling. So those are like some loose styles that I've seen. So I would say that slam really isn't a particular like style, but it's an event that we participate in as poets.
Let's talk about where you get your inspiration for your pieces. Are there any readings that you would suggest for young poets out there? Are they based on your life experiences?
Oh yeah, my poems are based on my life experiences. There was a point in time where I was writing I was writing stories that were not necessarily mine, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. I felt like I wasn't being my genuine self on stage, so I scrapped all of those poems and I kind of just started all over. And now all the poems that I perform are my own personal narratives. And as far as books go, I think reading The Music Lesson by Victor Wooten was actually one of the most pivotal moments in my life. Like, anybody who's even familiar with the book, if you've read even a chapter out of the book, like, how transformational it actually is. That's like reading about like his practice techniques and how he got so in touch with his with his art, because Victor Wooten, he's a bass guitarist, and how he got so in touch with his art by just like being in the moment and not focusing on doing it right, but focusing on doing it how it feels. I think that's really important, and I've taken so much away from that. Like, there's a section in the book where he talks about how like some of the greatest musicians, aren't necessarily like technically sound, right? But they play with the most feeling. Like, because we could all play the exact same song. We can learn how to play the guitar. We could all play the exact same song, but it will sound completely different from all of us because, the amount of like feeling that we put into it. And I think that's so important when it comes to, performing and writing. And I've adopted a lot of that.
Let's talk about that. What is your process of channeling your ideas, experiences, and your imagination in a single poem?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So how my poems usually start, They start randomly at about 3 o'clock in the morning. A lot of times, like I get up out of my sleep and I'm like, yo, I need to write that down, right? Because if I don't write it down, it's gone.
So you have a notebook by your bed and everything?
I use my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of just whip out the phone and I put it in the notes. You know what I mean? So that's usually the beginning of my process, is waking up randomly in the middle of the night and thinking, oh, wow, I have to write this down. And then, writing whatever is in my head, thinking that it's incredible, waking up and being like, oh, this is terrible, right? Reading it again and being like, oh, yeah, this isn't good at all. So going back and editing, because after that first draft is over, usually what I do, because it's all emotions initially, and then I go back and I say to myself, okay, if I was somebody else and I was to read this or listen to this, what are some things that I would need to know? Because a lot of times when we write, our first draft is it's all the feeling, right? And at times, if people don't have the background story behind all of the emotions, they don't understand what you're talking about. So my second phase is really just asking myself questions about the poem as if it's somebody else reading it for the first time, and thinking about, like, what would that person need to know? How would I explain this to somebody who isn't directly involved, or who doesn't know this story? So that's like the second phase, and then usually I'll perform a poem a few times, and then I'll kind of start making edits after that, because there's certain things that just come from performing your poems out loud, where you're like, okay, like I like this line, but it would sound better if I added another syllable here, or if I take out this line because it doesn't necessarily add to the poem, or that last phase is me performing the poem, and it's kind of just trial and error from there.
I imagine that words are extremely important in your line of work, but when writing your pieces, do you ever feel that words are sometimes not enough to express the emotion that you're trying to weave in to a piece that you're performing? Yeah,
I mean, there are moments that you kind of have to wait to have certain experiences before you can really put them into words. Like, for example, I'm actually working on a poem about my father, right? And I've been working on it for a while. Because me and my father, growing up, we didn't have the best relationship, and roughly about 3 years ago, like, we just really started talking and trying to work out our situation, but there's still so much work that needs to be done, and I feel like there's certain things that I need to talk to him about before I can write this poem. So sometimes you do have to go through things before you can write the poem that you really want to.
Has poetry helped you grow as a person?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because what's funny is when I was in high school, I was really quiet, really shy, super awkward, right? And
I would know nothing about that, not one thing.
Yeah, and I think being a performer and a writer has really helped me practice standing in front of people and communicating with them. I think if I never became a poet, if I never became a performer, I don't think I'd have those qualities now.
So what role do you think public speaking has in our society today?
Oh, I think it's extremely powerful, because, I mean, I think they did a poll a few years ago, and like the number one fear in America was public speaking.
And then 2 was death.
Yeah,
right?
the 2 was death, right? So like, there are people who would rather die than speak in front of a group of people that they don't know, right? So I think public speaking is really powerful, because if we don't share our narratives, if we don't share our stories, then how will people know how alike we all are, right? I think that's one of the main things that I took away from falling in love with poetry and writing and performing, is that I think I fell in love with the art form because I was sitting down and I was watching people tell their stories, and I said, wow, like, other people feel the exact same way I do, and if it wasn't for public speaking, I don't know if I would ever had that experience. Because, I mean, you can read a book. You could read a book of someone's work and really connect with it. But I think once you hear it out loud, you hear the intention behind the words, right? Because a sentence can sound a whole lot of different ways depending on which word you choose to emphasize, right? Like the sentence, I don't think you're crazy, right? It's like, I don't think you're crazy. It's like, I don't think you're crazy. I know you're crazy, right? There's like, I don't think you're crazy. It's like, you're not crazy, but you might be some other things. You know what I mean? So depending on which word you choose to emphasize, like, it could completely change what the sentence means and how another person will take it. So I think when you hear a poem performed out loud, like, it gives you another perspective of that person and of what they're saying, and I think that's really important.
Do you think that poetry can lead to people getting a better understanding of themselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think And what's interesting about like, writing and whatnot is that it's very much like keeping a journal, keeping a diary. Like I look back on poems that I wrote a long time ago, and that's like it's a snapshot of who I was at that time. And I've seen my growth. I've seen like how like the things that I care about have changed. How I go about addressing certain things has changed. I've seen, my perspectives change a lot because I have this written documentation of it all. So I think it provides you a moment to really reflect on who you are.
Before we go, would you mind doing a piece for us?
Yeah, I'll do something. I'll do something short. All right. So all right. So I was in a workshop one time, right, and we were given the assignment to write a letter to our bodies, right, and I was like, yeah, that's weird, right, but I'm gonna do it anyways, right. So this is what I came up with. Dear eyes, there are things I don't tell you. We both know that you are terrible at keeping secrets. Dear brain, you're a good listener, but you give horrible relationship advice. Dear heart, I trust you. Please don't mess this up. Dear legs, walking is easy, now pick a destination. Dear feet, some days you are all I have left to stand on. Dear hands, I get it. You like writing poetry, but come on, you can't bring a metaphor to a fist fight. Dear fists, you are not the solution to my problems. Dear voice, I'm gonna close my eyes and let you take over. Say something worth remembering. Yeah, that's it.
Wow, thank you so much for
You're
being on
welcome.
the program. Rudy Francisco,
Thank you for having
so
me.
much for being on the program.
Oh, no problem.
More inside the studio in just a moment. Stay tuned.